I've spent over 20 years in and around aging, professionally and personally. Part of that time was in hospice care, where we walked with people through the last seasons of their lives. Another part was spent helping families understand what it really meant when their once vibrant parents began to withdraw, to quiet, to soften, and sometimes to simply stop trying. What struck me over the years wasn't the decline itself. That's something most people expect as the body grows older. What many don't expect and few are prepared for is the emotional decline. Not just sadness. Not just the occasional forgetfulness or fatigue. I'm talking about a soft dimming from within, where the spark that once drove someone begins to flicker without warning. Where people who were once so full of life slowly shift into a silence that no one knows how to name. It often begins quietly. They start to excuse themselves from family gatherings sooner. Not rudely, just a gentle, "I think I'll sit this one out." They stop answering the phone as much. They might still smile, still say, "I'm fine," but something in their eyes says otherwise. It's not bitterness. It's not depression in the clinical sense. It's more like retreat. Dr. Margot Ellis, a palliative care physician I once worked with, used to describe it this way. There comes a point, often after 70, when a person isn't just tired in the body. They're tired in the spirit. And no one's ever taught us what to do with that kind of exhaustion. She was right, and I saw it time and time again. There was Mr. Alvarez, 74, retired engineer, lived with his daughter and her 2 kids. Kindman. Quiet. He used to walk to the local coffee shop every morning just to chat with the same 3 friends about the weather, politics, and old fishing stories. One day he just stopped going. No argument. No health scare. He just told his daughter, "I think I'm done with small talk." That was it. First they brushed it off. He's just resting more. But weeks passed, then months. He stopped initiating conversation, started sitting outside alone more. His daughter grew worried and called us. I went to visit. When I asked him gently what had changed, he looked out the window and said, "I've spent my whole life being available for everyone else. I think now I just want to be available to myself, even if I don't know what that means yet." It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even sadness. It was truth. But here's the challenge. This kind of emotional withdrawal is often misread. Families worry it's depression. Doctors may look at blood pressure, heart rate, weight loss, but they don't always ask about loneliness of the spirit, about whether someone feels seen. And more often than not, the person going through it can't articulate it either. They just know the world feels louder, heavier, and they no longer have the same desire to keep up. There's a common myth in our culture that staying social is the key to healthy aging. And yes, connection matters deeply, but forced connection, conversations that exhaust more than nourish, those can wear someone down faster than silence ever could. I've seen seniors who lit up when reading quietly in the garden, but grew pale at birthday parties they felt too tired to attend. I've watched women in their 70s weep not from illness, but because they no longer felt needed. Or worse, because they felt needed too much in ways that drained what little emotional energy they had left. This kind of fatigue isn't solved by more activity. It's helped by deeper recognition. Sometimes all someone needs is to be asked, "Is it okay if we just sit in quiet today?" Sometimes they need someone to say, "You don't have to explain why you're tired. I trust your body knows." Because more than a treatment, more than a solution, what many seniors long for is permission. To feel what they feel. To say no without guilt. To not be expected to perform wellness when they're simply learning how to be in this new season. That's where it begins, not with fixing, but with listening. One of the most misunderstood things I've seen in emotional aging is that the decline doesn't always look like despair. Sometimes it looks like politeness, a smile, a quiet withdrawal that no one questions because it's not disruptive. I remember Edith, 76, sharp as a tack, used to teach English literature. She had this grace about her, always composed. Her children adored her. They thought she was fine, thriving even. Until one day, her granddaughter told me, "Grandma's stopped correcting my grammar. She just listens now." It was a small comment, almost funny, but to me it rang loud. You see, Edith wasn't just getting tired of correcting grammar. She was tired of carrying the weight of being on. of always being the wise one, the dependable one, the teacher, the matriarch. The role never stopped, until one day she laid it down, and no one noticed, because quiet people are easy to overlook, especially when they've mastered the art of looking okay. This is where emotional decline becomes dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it's so silent that it slips by undetected. There's an expectation, especially in Western culture, that aging gracefully means staying energetic, social, constantly engaged. But the truth is, some people age gracefully by slowing down, by becoming more selective, by choosing not to waste energy on surface-level living. Dr. Anna Choi, a geriatric therapist I deeply admire, once told me, "Emotional aging isn't always about sadness. Sometimes it's about clarity. But when that clarity comes with disconnection, people worry." She explained how many of her patients after 70 started to question things more deeply, not with urgency but with detachment. They weren't afraid of death. They were tired of roles, tired of the social masks they'd worn for decades. This shift isn't necessarily unhealthy. In fact, many times it's an awakening, but it's often mislabeled as decline, especially by family members who equate change with loss. I've heard daughters say, "Mom's not herself anymore. She used to laugh so much." Or sons whisper, "Dad's so distant these days. He doesn't call like before." And sometimes, that's true. There is sadness. But other times, the change is not a sign of collapse. It's a move inward, a turning towards something quieter. And that deserves to be honored, not rushed through. One thing that helps, in my experience, is changing the way we ask questions. Instead of, "Are you okay?" Try, "What feels different lately?" Instead of, "You should get out more." Try, "Would you like some company in the quiet?" And perhaps most importantly, let go of the need to cheer them up. Not everyone wants to be cheered. Some just want to be heard, without being fixed. I once sat with a man, 81, who told me, "I'm not lonely. I'm full of memories, full of silence. I don't need more people. I need fewer interruptions." What a beautiful thing to know what you need, but it takes strength and support to say it out loud. That's the emotional muscle many older adults develop. The ability to honor their needs without shame. But they still need someone beside them who understands that emotional quiet is not emotional absence. It's a presence, just in a different form. So if you're noticing a shift in someone you love over 70, pause before you panic. Watch gently, ask softly, and trust that stillness can be a sign of transformation, not just retreat. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. There's something quietly profound that happens when a person passes 70. It's not just the shift in energy or in pace, it's the change in what matters. I've seen it in dozens of people from different walks of life, different faiths, different temperaments. But they all share one thing, a new relationship with meaning. Things that once felt urgent, proving yourself, chasing approval, staying in the loop, start to fall away. Not because they lose their value entirely, but because the person no longer feels tethered to them. It's as though the center of gravity shifts inward. This was clear with Judith, a former head nurse in her younger years. She was 78 when I met her. Her family had asked me to check in because, in their words, she's not herself anymore. When I arrived, Judith was in her garden, pulling weeds with unhurried hands. We talked for an hour, not about symptoms or regrets. We talked about soil, about how certain plants thrive in silence, how others need trimming before they can bloom again. And somewhere in that conversation, I saw what her family couldn't. Judith hadn't disappeared. She had distilled. She told me, "I used to need to be useful every hour of the day. Now I just want to be rooted. And I don't think my children know the difference." There's a common mistake people make when observing emotional quiet in seniors. They assume it's detachment. But often it's the opposite. It's depth. It's someone who's learned that presence isn't always loud. What looks like withdrawal might be wisdom. I've met many over 70s who told me they didn't want to go to every event anymore. Not because they were depressed, but because they didn't want to spend their remaining energy on things that didn't feel sacred. That word, sacred, came up more often than you'd expect. A man once said to me, "At this age, I only have space for sacred conversations." And I understood him. When your time feels finite, you don't want to waste it on things that skim the surface. This isn't selfish. It's emotional discernment. But families don't always see it that way. I've heard phrases like, "She used to be so outgoing. He doesn't even try to stay connected." They're giving up. And maybe, in some cases, there is giving up. That happens too. But more often, it's giving in. To truth. To rest. To the natural ebb of life as it nears its dusk. If we can stop seeing this change as failure and start seeing it as transition, the way we support our elders can change, too. One woman, a retired therapist herself, told me she didn't want her family to bring her distractions anymore. Not puzzles. Not new tech. Not group outings. She said, "I want them to sit next to me without trying to fix the silence. Just share it." We forget how healing shared silence can be. There's a reason hospice workers often talk about presence over words. When someone is nearing the end of their journey, the most powerful gift you can offer isn't advice. It's companionship. And perhaps that's true not just for the dying, but for anyone who's aging emotionally. They don't need fixing. They need witnessing. So what can we do? First, we listen. Really listen to what's said and what's not said. Then we stop expecting them to return to who they were. They're not lost. They're becoming someone new. And lastly, we meet them where they are, not where we wish they'd be. One of the hardest parts of emotional aging, both for the person living it and for those around them, is how easy it is to be misunderstood. You see, emotional decline after 70 rarely announces itself with drama. It doesn't come with a label. It shows up in small shifts that are easy to misread, especially when you're looking for medical symptoms and missing emotional ones. Take Mr. Lennox, for example. He was 82, lived alone after his wife passed, and had a daughter who visited every weekend. She loved him deeply, but lately he'd stopped making coffee before she arrived. Stopped asking questions. Just smiled, nodded, listened. She told me, "He just doesn't seem to care anymore." But when I visited and asked how he felt, he said, "I care. I just don't want to have to perform it. I love her. I just don't have the energy to prove it every Saturday." There's something profound in that kind of honesty. But it's a kind of honesty that can be hard to hear, especially from someone you love. We often equate emotional vitality with outward expression. We think people who feel must show. But after a certain age, that equation doesn't hold. Emotion becomes quieter, deeper, and less willing to be managed for the sake of others' comfort. This is what emotional fatigue can look like. Not returning calls even though they still care. Skipping family gatherings even though they love everyone. Saying "I'm tired" when what they mean is, "I can't carry the emotional load today." And the truth is, many seniors don't know how to explain this shift, because they've never been taught that it's okay to not explain. One of the women I worked with in my early hospice years said something I never forgot. "I've spent 40 years being polite about how I feel. Now I want the freedom to be real, even if it makes people uncomfortable." That stuck with me. So much of our older generation was raised to be agreeable, to not make waves, to smile through discomfort. But aging, real aging, calls for something deeper, calls for truth. And truth isn't always tidy. Sometimes it looks like not wanting to talk. Sometimes it means telling your adult children, "No, I don't want to be part of that decision," because the emotional bandwidth isn't there anymore. One daughter I met was heartbroken because her father stopped asking about her job. "It's like he doesn't care," she said. But when I asked him, he smiled sadly and said, "I care, but I don't remember the details. And I'd rather say nothing than pretend I do." That's not neglect. That's integrity. And that's the kind of emotional shift we need to learn to honor. It's not always comfortable, but neither is growing old. There's a rawness to it, a stripping away of pretense. And with it comes the opportunity for a new kind of connection. One that isn't based on doing, but simply on being. If you're supporting someone over 70, here's something I've found helpful. Let go of your expectations about what love should look like from them. It may no longer look like storytelling or compliments or long conversations. It might look like quiet company, a shared gaze, or a simple, steady presence. Don't take their silence personally. Don't assume their stillness is indifference. And please don't try to cheer them up like they're broken. Instead, join them in the space they're choosing, even if it's wordless, even if it feels unfamiliar, because in that quiet, there may be more connection than you've ever known. By the time someone reaches their 70s, their emotional world has weathered more than most of us can imagine. They've lost people quietly, sometimes without goodbye. They've watched their roles shift, from being needed constantly to being remembered occasionally. They've gone from the center of the room to the corner chair, watching others take their turn. But what I've seen, what I know, is that this isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning of something softer, and often something truer. When I worked with Mrs. Hartley, 86 and proud of every wrinkle on her face, she once said, "I'm not disappearing. I'm refining. The older I get, the more I choose what I give my heart to." That's not decline. That's wisdom. And yet, too many families, too many systems fail to recognize it. We don't have enough language to name these transitions. So we call them withdrawing, slipping, losing touch. But if you sit long enough with someone who's emotionally aging, you'll realize they're not slipping away. They're settling into themselves, into the rhythm of quiet mornings, into the truth that less noise sometimes brings more peace. I've sat with men who used to run companies, now content watching birds outside their window. I've listened to women who used to manage 3 generations, now choosing silence over constant conversation, not out of pain but out of preference. And I've seen what happens when someone is finally allowed to be as they are. No pushing, no prodding, no you should. They soften. They breathe easier. Sometimes they even smile more in their own quiet way. So, if you're caring for someone over 70 or walking that path yourself, remember this. You are not required to stay who you were at 40. You are not less just because you speak less. You are not broken if what you crave is peace, not productivity. The heart doesn't stop feeling. It just feels differently. And our job as children, caregivers, partners, friends, is not to pull someone back to how they used to be. It's to meet them exactly where they are now, and stay. Because emotional decline, as we call it, is rarely a fall. It's a turning, a soft folding inward, a sacred reorientation towards stillness. It doesn't mean they need to be saved. It means they deserve to be seen. If this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here,